Live. All right, welcome to week 2 of Animate Fundamentals. We are looking at the next assignment in our modules, which is going to be coming up anytime. There we go. Animate Fundamentals Chapter 1, Getting Acquainted. This chapter is designed to acquaint you with the interface and some of the major concepts associated with Adobe Animate. In this chapter, you will create a simple slideshow animation by importing assets into Animate. So one of the things we're going to learn is how to import things into Animate, as well as using the drawing tools to create some assets, creating what are called keyframes, placing assets on those keyframes so that they animate in over time. Follow along with this chapter and you will learn everything you need to know. Now, I did download a little demo of what I have made, but let's begin by looking at Animate first. And then we'll open some stuff up. Now, when we first open Animate, we are going to see the splash screen for this particular program. Everybody sees this screen? Okay, very good. One of the strengths of Animate is you can output to just about any platform you can possibly imagine, whether it be a Mac, a PC, an iPhone, an Android phone, a tablet, an Android tablet, an iPad. It doesn't really matter. Animate can export something, a runtime file, as it's called, that is compatible with all of these different platforms. That's what makes it a really great environment to author in. Now we have some basic setups, and they're listed by how you would use them, like character animation. So these are all going to be HD. They got 4K Ultra HD now. Oh my God, 4K, right? Higher resolution than reality. All right. Then we have like social. So if you're making something for social media, maybe an ad that's going to run on somebody's social media or something like that, you would make them very small. You want ads to be small and load quickly. The game environment is a wonderful use for this tool as well. Education, many times if you go to Dillon's or you go to work for a job, one of the first things you have to do is sit through like 5 hours worth of training materials, right? How not to slip on a wet floor, how to put a wet floor sign out so your customers don't slip, things like that. Oftentimes those are made using Adobe Animate, because they combine video with questions, with user input, and all of this stuff that allows you to create a rich experience that hopefully expresses to your new employee how important it is to not leave the mop bucket out in the middle of the hallway. Again, ads. This is the bread and butter for Adobe Animate for the long time, was making those annoying little flash ads that would take over your screen or run up in the corner and stuff like that. That is kind of going away. As of 2020, no browser is going to support native Flash files. That's not a big deal because we can export HTML5 or HTML4, whichever it is. I just looked at that web. Let's go to web. But we can export files for that. All right, and I believe it's HTML5. But we're going to click on advanced. Now, when we talk about the source file, in this class we are going to create FLA files. And if we scroll down a little bit under advanced, we will see where it says ActionScript 3.0. That's going to be our default file type. From the ActionScript 3.0, you can branch out and you can export for different platforms. The book goes on to say that the ActionScript 3.0 is your basic file type because it supports the most features that Flash can use. So if you're making an HTML5 document or a Canvas document, as it would be called, you may not have access to some of the tools within Flash. They're not supported by HTML5. But if you make something in ActionScript 3.0, it is going to support the latest and greatest that Flash can do. I'm sorry, Animate. There I go. I told you I'm going to call this program Flash an awful lot. It was Flash for 14 years, and then they changed the name to Animate. So I will do my best. But if I say Flash, I mean Animate. And so let's just go ahead and click on the ActionScript 3.0. Now we would want to give it a name maybe. Just making sure I'm doing this right. And then we're going to hit OK. Now this opens up our desktop in a way that's not very useful. So one of the first things you want to learn how to do with any Adobe product is how to set your desktop to be what you want it to be. Now, I like the animator layout myself. Wow, the resolution on this screen is killing me. Hang on one second. I think I might have screwed up already. That's what happens when I practice on a PC and I come to a Mac. Give me 1 second. We will probably edit this part out. No, I'm kidding. I'm going to leave it in. I might have had us create the wrong file type. My apologies for that. So we go to advanced. My bad on that. I apologize. I should have paid attention to my pop-ups. Notice when I hover over this, little pop-up window comes up. Okay, that's going to happen all kinds of places in Adobe Animate. We should have selected the middle one. My apologies for that. So you can close the one you currently have open. And where the hell is my stage? I really hate Macs. This is not what I want. I know it's not, but try this one more time. Okay, we're going to differ from the book a little bit. And this is what I would like you to do. So go close all of those windows that you might have had open. Come back to this screen. Where it says character animation, I want you to select that option. And then I want you to go to HD 1280 by 720. And then we're going to say create. Perfect. All right. Does everybody see what I see? Let me walk around, I'll tell you whether or not you see what I see. Okay. Go ahead and close that. Say no. Come back here to that one. There you go. And then that. And create. Yes, yeah, that's HD, but not crazy HD.
There we go. Okay.
Perfect. Nope. Yes, okay, good. Okay. Love new versions of the software. Think you know what you're doing. Turns out you really don't. All right. So to kind of go from the book here, I'm going to read just a little bit. This is off of chapter 3, or page 3. The different document types. Okay, so you could choose HTML5 Canvas to create animated assets that'll play back in modern browsers. Okay. That's going to be an HTML5 document. How many web developers do we have here? A couple of you. You need to know this stuff. Becky is the person you want to talk to about HTML. I am not. I took an HTML class 18 years ago. All right. The way I was taught to do things, people would just laugh at and go, get out of here. So I don't do much for the web. That being said, now, like I said, Animate is going to not be supported by modern browsers here pretty shortly, 2020. Nobody's going to support it, and that's fine because we can do HTML5. Then we also have the WebGL, which is a standard for interactive assets to take advantage of hardware accelerated features of the new browsers. Like, I don't know if you guys know or not, but some of the old first-person shooter games are now available to play through your browser. That's crazy to me because I had to buy a $400 video card to play that game when it came out, and now you can play it in your browser. That's insane to me. But normally we're going to choose an ActionScript 3.0 because we're going to create interactions with activity, and that's kind of what we did there when we said the character development and then the size. Now let's see, we want to open a file. There's several ways we could do this. We can come up here to, and I need to make sure you guys understand this. If I have the program not selected, I don't know if everybody knows what I did, but I clicked on my desktop. Now my finder bar up at the top here, this is where I find things like File and Edit, which on a PC are normally attached to the top of this window right here. On a Mac, they are not. They float across the top. So if you have clicked out of Adobe Animate and you come up here to File, you are not in the Adobe Animate dropdown anymore. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? Okay, so make sure that you have Adobe Animate as your main window and it is active. It'll say Animate in the top left-hand corner, but we're going to go to File and then Open. Browse to where you saved those files at today. So hopefully you did them on the desktop. Makes them easy to find. We are in week 2, lesson, and let's go ahead, we're going to go ahead and open up the ending file. So go to 01 end, and then this is 01end.fla. Double click on that or click the open button, and that's going to open that file for you. Now a much easier way to open a file is to browse to wherever it is you have saved. So such in this case, I'm going to go back to the start because we're going to be working with that one as well. There is no start. That's okay. We'll start with this. That's fine. I'll go ahead and just drag this one to the window and then release it, and it will open it. And so that's a project that I've worked on. And I'll show you that at the end. But for now, we're just going to start in the end file. So this is what we're going to make together as a group. If I press Command Return, if I'm on a PC, that's going to be Control. Anytime I say Command, it's the CMD key in your head, or I guess it actually says Command. In your head, I want you to hear Control. If you're on a PC, you're going to press the Control key. Anytime we press the Command key. Now what that's going to do is that's going to preview the finished product for me. Everybody seeing what I see?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
Command, return. I probably said enter. Same thing. Same key. Okay. Macs are just different. They just word things a little differently. All right. So that's something you want to write down in your notes as you're taking notes today. Command return, Control enter is how I preview my movie. As an animator, one of your jobs is to stare at your animations until you hate them. You have to go over them again and again and again. This is a quick and easy way. So it's just Command return. But that's what we're going to do today. We're going to import these pictures. We're going to place them on the timeline. We're going to animate them slightly. And then we're going to make some stars. All right. Once we have a file open, it's important that we be able to save it. So if I have the file open like this, I can simply come up here and do File, Save As, or Save. If I do a Save As, it's going to give me the option of renaming it if I want to. As we go through, we will get to that. Okay. Now I got a little distracted. I apologize. Let's go back to discussion of the layout. So up in the top right-hand corner, mine says Animator. Yours might say something like Essentials. If I click and hold on that, there are a number of different layouts that I can choose from. The nice thing about having a single Adobe account is if you log into this machine and you have saved a particular layout at home, this is going to lay out the same way. So that's kind of a nice little feature. It will save your layouts. You're welcome to use whichever layout works best for you. I'm not here to teach you that stuff. But I really like the Animator layout because it puts most everything I want within 1 or 2 clicks. The most commonly used tools. We often talk about a 70-30 rule. And that's so you're going to use 30% of the tools 70% of the time. Those are your tools that you use all the time. Now, the one change that I do make whenever I set up this layout is I like my toolbar to be in a different place. Now, if I grab any of these titles where it says Properties or Timeline or Align or Tools, and I click and drag, I'm going to make that piece free floating. And it's just going to float on top. Now, what I like to do with my tools is I like them to run right next to my stage. So I will dock my tools right there and then slide it over. So kind of get used to the fact that you can adjust this to whatever you want. You can move these around. You can dock things with each other. And that's just pretty standard on all Adobe products. Something you're going to want to get used to how it works. Now, sometimes you'll jump to a different program, such as Autodesk. You don't grab the name. There are 3 little dots that you grab. And that's how you reposition your palettes in an Autodesk product. Pretty straightforward. What you learn in one class is going to transfer to many, many other classes as well. So pick a layout that works for you. Again, if you want to follow along 100%, Animator, and I move my toolbar. Other than that, it's pretty standard. I close a few things like I don't really like this window. Don't need that open. Okay. If you got it all set up and you're signed into your Adobe account, then you can come over here to where it says Animator. Keep losing my mouse. And you could say, should be able to save the workspace. And why is that not here? Oh, new workspace. Okay. Sometimes it's right in front of you. It's a good thing I don't work with snakes. All right, so it says new workspace. I would click on this, and then I could call this John's workspace. And so next time I log into this machine and I log into this particular account, Adobe Animate should remember how I like things set up. Go ahead and give that a shot. And I spelled my name wrong. That's awesome. Good deal. Okay. Now I'm going to give you a quick rundown of the interface. And then we will keep going after that. So, interface is pretty well laid out in a logical way. We have, of course, our drop-down menus across the top. From here, I can access any functionality I want to from the program. Oftentimes, if you do not see a panel that you think you should see, you need to go to where it says Window, and then you will find that panel listed there. Not all layouts show you all the panels. They can't. There's too many of them. Again, it goes back to our 70-30 rule. Below that, we have our timeline. Now, we're going to spend some time with the timeline, and we'll hopefully get really familiar with it over the next couple of weeks. But this is where we will place our keyframes and we will time our animations. Lots of buttons up here that we will go over as we come to use them. Going down the right-hand side, we have what is called the Properties panel. This is probably the single most important panel in Adobe Animate. Depending on what I have selected, I get contextual information out of this panel. Currently, we should have nothing selected, and so we've got things like FPS, that's frames per second. So this is my document properties. It's telling me that we're running at 30 frames per second. It also tells me the size of my document, 1280 by 720. It tells me the color of my stage and things like that. Now, if I come over here and I grab, say, my text tool, which T, that's the universal sign for all Adobe products, means text. Now this properties has changed to the properties for that particular tool. All right, you cannot work in Adobe Animate and not have the properties window open. You must pay attention to that window. It's going to be super useful. Below that, we have our library, which we will look at shortly as well. This is where we hold assets. When we import something into Adobe Animate, it's going to go to the library where we can use it over and over and over again. And then we will also create certain constructs, certain objects inside Adobe Animate called movie clips or buttons. Those too will be stored in our library. Again, the strength of that is I can create it once, and then I can use it multiple times throughout my presentation, and it doesn't make my file any bigger because it is stored in the library. Next up, we have our stage. The stage is where we will draw and animate much of our stuff. We will be importing some things from outside. For the most part, though, Adobe Animate has a wonderful set of drawing tools. Very powerful, very intuitive, very easy to use. So this is our stage. The white area is the actual stage. The black area is called the pasteboard. Yes, go. You will only see what is on the stage itself. You will not see anything that's on the pasteboard. Okay, so that's outside the bounds of the stage. Next to that, I have my toolbar. Tools are arranged in a logical manner. We start with our selection tools. We have our main selection tool, and then we have our sub-selection tool. As I hover over each of these, it gives me the name, and it also shows me the shortcut key for that particular tool. Pretty handy. You're going to want to memorize those as much as possible. Shortcut keys will make you much faster. Now, occasionally we will see some of these tools, like the third one down, which is my free transform tool, has a little arrow in the bottom corner. Whenever we see that, that means there are other tools hiding underneath there. So if I click and hold, we will see that not only do I have a free transform tool, which allows me to scale, rotate, or move an object, we also have a gradient transform tool, which we will look at probably in a week or two when we start doing graphics. We have different selection tools, a 3D rotation tool. We have a lasso tool, which allows us to draw a freeform shape and select just parts of an object. Below that, we have our creation tools. It's going to be things like our pen tool, our text tool, the line tool. Again, we have a rectangle tool, but hiding under that, we have a rectangle and then something called a rectangle primitive tool. They're slightly different. We have an oval tool. We have the polystar tool, which we will use today to make some stars. We have a pencil, and we have a paintbrush. We have a couple of different paintbrushes. Now, when we talk about the difference between what the pencil tool and what the paintbrush does, we will refer to anything done by the pencil tool as a stroke. Anything done by the paintbrush will be referred to as a fill. As we start making objects today and next week, we will get down into this and we'll understand the difference between the two. We have a bone tool, which we will animate a little character later in the semester using the bone tool. We have our fill bucket, which again refers to fills. And then we have our ink bottle, which refers to strokes. Now, I will do my best to make the distinction of those clear when we get there. But for now, just know that we have two different shapes, so to speak, that we need to worry about. Eyedropper tool, that's the universal tool in Adobe that allows you to select a different color or anything like that. Eraser. The width tool we're not going to worry about. We're not going to look at that. Asset warp tool, that one's new. We have a camera built in to Adobe Animate, which we will spend a week playing with the camera in a couple of weeks. We have our hand tool. It's going to allow me to pan around. We have the zoom tool. Now I do need to go ahead and tell you this now. If I want to pan, I'm not going to come over and grab that hand. I'm going to press the space bar. And that's going to let me pan around my zoom or my image. So let's say if I was zoomed in really far, then I could pan around my image. Same with zooming. I'm never going to come over here and grab the zoom tool. I'm going to use Command plus or minus. That's going to zoom in and out of your stage. You also have a drop-down window up here. Oftentimes fit in window is what you're going to want to use. But you might want to set it to 100% or more. So different ways you can move around. Below that we have our stroke color. If I want to choose no. If you want to choose a new color for your stroke, then click on the color swatch itself, and then you have all of the colors that you could possibly imagine. Same with our fills. Now again, I will make those clear when we get to those. Okay. Below that we have even more palettes that help us do things. Some of them we don't need, like we don't necessarily need the scene palette right now, so I'm going to 86 that one. Or the motion presets, we don't need that either. What we do need is our color and our color swatches. So this is where I can modify the color of an object as well as doing it here. Or if I had an object selected on the stage, those properties would also appear on the right-hand side as well. And then we have the Align tool, the Transform, and the Info tool. The Info panel just gives me basic information about any object I might have selected. The Transform tool allows me to rotate, scale, that type of thing to an object. And the Align tool we will look at as we go through, but it allows you to align your objects either to each other or to the stage, and neatness counts. So you got to make sure things are nice and neat and where you want them to be. Okay. I'm going to give Aiden a second. I hope that he hurries back. Any questions up to this point? So far it's been pretty straightforward. You should be a little overwhelmed at this point. You're like, holy crap, here's a brand new program, all this stuff. I don't know what any of it does. That's okay. How many have used Photoshop? Okay, awesome. A lot of the same things transfer from one to the other. We have filters in Animate now, just like they have in Photoshop. So I can drop a drop shadow on something. We'll look at that today. It's the same idea, same concepts. As far as the drawing tools themselves, now they're going to be a little closer to Illustrator. They're not going to be like drawing in Photoshop. It's vector-based. And so when we talk, say, a vector-based image versus a raster-based or a bitmap, the main difference is with a bitmap image, each and every pixel of that image is assigned a value. This much red, this much green, this much blue. And that's how we get all the different colors. You ever take like a little tiny picture and then stretch it really big, right? And then it looks like crap because your pixels are now this big. And that's why. Now a vector drawing, it doesn't worry about how many pixels are in the image. It doesn't worry about the value of those pixels. What it says is that we have a point in space here, and we have another point in space right here, and we're going to draw a line between those 2 points. And if we have to curve that line, then we will curve that line. But it doesn't matter if I scale it up or I scale it down, because it doesn't care how many pixels are in it. It says we have this point in space, and as I see if I can go to my basic window here. Oh, awesome. My info window. As I move my mouse around, you will notice that I'm getting X and Y coordinates. So it'll say start at X731, draw this line till X425. And if I scale that up, then it will scale appropriately. All right, so since Aiden is back, we're going to go ahead and jump into doing what the book wants us to do a little bit more, and less about me just kind of talking about Flash, Animate. And we're going to begin by importing our images into this. So let's go ahead and go to File. And I want to look real quick and see if because there should be an empty one in here. So let's go to File, Working Copy. Maybe that's... Oh, okay, never mind. No, okay. If you do not have an empty document open, go to File, New. Like I said, let's just go ahead and select the HD 1280 by 720. It's going to be a little different than what they have us working in, but that's fine. And then create. Now, the number one thing you want to do is you want to save your file before you do anything else. So let's go File, Save As. You will be turning these files into me, so make sure your name is in it somehow. And that's all I really need. But make sure that your name, so I'm going to do Simpson, and this is chapter 1, so chap 1 is what I'm going to call this particular file. Pay attention to where you're saving it. Macs are a little different. If you want to browse, you need to click on the little arrow that's pointing down, and that's going to let you browse. By default, it's going to save it in the last folder in which you open something from. So this is going to go ahead and save it on my desktop, and I'm going to browse to it just to make sure it saves where I want it to. And we're week 2, and I've called this Simpson Chap 1, and you will notice that this is a FLA document, and that's your source file. Right? Don't lose this file, because if you do, your project is gone. This is the one that you keep under lock and key, the FLA file. And then we're going to say save. Okay. Once we've saved now, Adobe Animate knows where to autosave to. There's an autosave feature in this program. The book talks about it a little later on in the chapter, but just know that about every 5 minutes, this program is going to back up your work for you. That way, if the program crashes, you will have a file called whatever your file name is, _recover. And that is the last autosave that they've used. But let's look at getting our images in. Okay. So we're going to go to File, Import. Now we've got some options. It'll say import to stage, which is not what we want to do, because by doing so, it's going to take those assets and place them right on the stage. We want to import to library. And it might take it a second to figure out where it needs to go. We're going to go into images. I lied. We're going to go into lesson 1. Images. Okay. Why are you being so weird? Don't be that way. Okay. Now I could do this one at a time, but I'm hoping Yes, good. That I can select multiple images. Now, I did not select the first one. I just did background, photo 1, photo 2, and photo 3. Okay, does everybody see those? Okay. Let's go ahead and bring those in so we can say open. And that's going to bring them and put them in my library. Easier way to do that is find them wherever they're stored, drag and drop them right into the library. That way you don't have to go up to File, Import, all of that. Drag and drop is the best thing to happen to Adobe products, period. I love being able to just grab what I need and drop them in there. Now, unlike a lot of programs, when I bring these images in, they become part of the file. So I don't have to worry about keeping track of these, or if I lose them, it's not a huge deal because they are part of the file at this point. We are going to go through all of that as we work through the book. Okay. So we are at about page 14 or 15 at this point. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but we're going to begin by setting up our background. Now, when we do that, there are a couple different ways we can do this. Let's take a minute to look at our timeline up here first. The timeline consists of layers, which stack vertically. And the new icon, right here, if I hover over it, it will say new layer, will allow me to create new layers. Each new layer will be put on top of the previous layer. Actually, not on top of the previous layer, it will be put on top of the layer you have selected. So if I were to create a new layer here, it's going to put it between 2 and 3. It's also going to call it layer 4. It will name them 1, 2, 3, 4 as you create them. If I need to delete a layer, I'm going to highlight it and I'm going to click on the trash can. Pressing the delete key will not delete the layer. You could also right click, and right clicking is your friend. Even though these mice do not look like they support right clicking, you can right click with these particular mice. If you're on a PC, that should be second nature. But that's going to open up contextual menus depending on where you click. So again, if I wanted to delete the layer, there is a delete layer option for me there. Next to each layer name, which if I double click on will allow me to change it. So layer 1, I'm going to rename background because here in a minute, I'm going to bring an image in and make it the background. If we go over, we will see that we have 3 little icons. And again, as I hover over stuff, it's super important that you realize it's going to tell you what it is. And if you know what it's called, chances are you'll be able to figure out what it does. Such as the eyeball icon. This is my show or hide all layers. If I want to hide everything I have currently on the stage, then I click the icon. If I only want to do it for a particular layer, click the dot. Now this is hidden anything that I might have had on layer background. And then we have the lock icon. If a layer is locked and you try to create something on it, it's going to give you the universal sign for no. That's a circle with a line through it. And then if I do try to create something there, it's going to throw up a message. It says, hey, the current layer background is locked. Do you want to go ahead and unlock it? 9 times out of 10, the answer is no. You locked it for a reason, right? So you wouldn't accidentally put stuff on that layer. Use your layers wisely. And by that, I mean use a lot of them. That makes no difference if you throw everything on a single layer or if you put everything on its own layer. It's going to be the same file size. A lot of students get it in their head, and yes, if you have a ton of content on each layer, then it's going to make your file bigger. But it's going to be big whether you have it on 100 layers or you have it on 1. When we start animating, It's going to be very important that we only have one object per layer. Otherwise, your animations will break. Need to understand that layer 2, any object I put on layer 2 is going to be in front of background layer. If I make a new layer above layer 2, in this case it's layer 8, because I've made up to 8 layers so far, I've made 7 layers. Anything on layer 8 is going to cover up whatever's on layer 2. Now if I need to reorder these, it's a pretty simple matter of just grabbing them and moving them around. Go ahead and get rid of that one. As we move to the right-hand side of our timeline, there's some things you need to be aware of. Number one, let's go ahead and make these a little bigger, are these right here, and these are called frames. Now you can drag on the little slider bar over here. You can make them very, very small, which is impossible to work with, or you can make them fairly good sized. When we talk about frames, we are talking about the individual images that will be shown in rapid succession to create our animation. We talk about moving pictures. There's no such thing as a moving picture. It is a series of still images that are flashed really, really fast. Gives us the illusion of movement. When we talk about animation, you'll hear frames per second an awful lot. That's how many images you need for 1 second's worth of animation. By default, for this particular file type, it is 30 frames per second. That's pretty good frame rate for what we're doing. If you're playing a game, you want 60 to 100 or more if you can get them. Go to see a movie, it's probably going to be at 29 frames per second or 24 frames per second. Different formats require different frames per second. These 3 numbers right here are going to tell us that. That very first number, I know that's really small. It says number 1. That's because my red playhead here is sitting at frame number 1. Next to that is the elapsed time. Currently 0.0, no time has elapsed. And then we have our frame rate. We're going to kind of skip these icons for right now. We'll come back to them as we go. Let's go ahead and give ourselves some time to work on our timeline. So we are going to go out to, I'm going to go out to frame 30, which would be 1 second. I'm going to click on the frame on the background, and I'm going to press the F5 key. Now, since we're on a Mac, you may have to press the FN key. The FN key is going to be directly above the arrow keys. It says FN. Now, the reason you have to do this on a Mac is some of the F keys or the function keys are tied to the operating system. You'll notice some of them have little pictures on them, like F12 and F10 or F11. What happens when I press F11 and F12? The volume goes up and down. That's because it is tied to that particular behavior on a Mac operating system. Sometimes your PC will be like that too, not very often. But I'm not going to say FN F5 every time. If you are pressing any of these function keys across the top and you want it to function in Animate, go ahead and commit to memory. I have to press the F key, the FN key, before I can press the F key. Now, what happened when I pressed the F5 key? It created a time span for me. Notice how background layer looks different than layer 2. Okay, if you don't have 2 layers, go ahead and make 2 layers so you can combine or you can compare the 2. Background layer has 30 seconds worth of time on, 30 frames worth of time on it, which is 1 second's worth of animation. If you don't see that or it's not working, just don't hesitate to say, hey, that's not what I got. So let's go ahead and grab our background picture. And we're going to take it, background.png, and we're going to take it, we're just going to drop it onto the stage. Make sure that you have the background layer selected when you do this. Does everybody get that? Okay, okay, what happened? Let's go ahead and I'm gonna reset your layout. Okay. So yes on that. Just file and then went to reset animated, because that's the same layout that I've got. Okay. So let's go file, import library. We're gonna get those images. So we want to hold shift and select the bottom one. And actually, yeah. So go ahead and deselect. And then start with the top, hold shift, and then hit open. Okay. Next thing is, we're gonna make a new layer. If we double click, we can rename the layer. And I'm gonna make this, yeah, 31st.
I just saw that later, but I just moved it.
Right.
I just log out so far, not from here.
Oh, I got
I
you.
just log out from the animation.
Uh-huh.
I just log out other account, but I cannot log out from this one.
Okay.
But I just did from here.
Okay.
I just logging in between that time. Let's lose it.
Yeah, that's weird. For now though, come out and hit FN F5 on layer 1. So make sure that you select, come down to the bottom. Okay, fine, right, perfect. And now FN F5. So FN plus F5. Perfect. So that's created that time span for you. Okay. Now we can drag our background. This one, top, first one. And then just drop it right on the stage. Perfect.
All of them like that.
For now, just that one.
Thank you.
Good, good, good. Awesome. Okay. So our size of stage is a little different from their setup, but that's okay. All right. If we wanted to, we could deselect what we have selected. We could come over and we could resize the stage. I'm not concerned about it. We're going to leave it at 1280 by 720. This will bring us, however, to our align tool. Now, when I bring this in, I'm just kind of dropping it on there, okay? That works great for stuff on new grounds. You can be sloppy on new grounds. People are paying you to make stuff. You want it to look good. One way that we can make sure things look good is we have our objects selected. I'm going to use my align tool now to go ahead and align it to the center of the stage. And I did that incorrectly. There's a little button down at the bottom that says align to stage. Make sure that's ticked. And now we're going to align horizontal center and vertical center. So now it's right in the middle of my stage for me. Okay. And again, you'll get lots of practice at that as you go through this semester. If I drag my playhead now, we will see that that's annoying. Drag this down just a little bit. Why won't you go? Thank you. Why won't you go past it? I know why. Anyway. We can see that the picture stays up there for the whole 30 frames. Let's go ahead and call this photo 1, the next layer up. Special characters are not, I didn't realize I put a special character in there.
Is it the space?
It must have been the space. That's new. That's awesome. First time I've gotten that one. So if you put a space in your layer name, it's going to automatically convert that to an underscore. At least that's what it did for me. That's a good rule of thumb. When you are naming files and things like that, don't ever put spaces in the file names. Some operating systems struggle with that. You ever go to a website and it's www.mysite dot exclamation point percent symbol pound sign. That's generally because somebody put a space in that file name, and the browser has no idea how to display that. So, as a rule, I never put spaces in anything. Good?
Yeah.
Okay. So, with our photo 1 layer selected, let's grab photo number 1 and drag it onto our stage. Now it's going to do what I want it to do. I want you to grab your playhead and scrub back and forth. What happens after you leave frame number 1?
Picture's not
The picture disappears. That is correct. So, we've learned our first very important lesson. If I want something to stay on the stage, then I need to make sure that I have the timeline for it. So, again, FN, F5. And I did that at 30 frames. Again, the reason I did that was so that that picture stays on the stage the entire time. If for any reason your timelines are different lengths, whatever is on a short timeline is going to disappear. Now, once I put that object on the stage, we can just grab it and move it around. If I want to rotate that object, that is going to be done using my free transform tool. Not only that, but have your free transform tool selected, so that's the third one from the top. Take a look at the bottom of your toolbar. You should see like a snapping icon, number 1, the magnet. And then you'll see some different options for the free transform tool, such as skew and rotate at scale. Those are the only 2 options for this particular item. Depending on what I'm using, I will get different options available to me at the bottom of my toolbar. Again, that's one of those context-sensitive menus. It's only going to show up when it's needed. In this particular case, I can skew this object, or I could rotate it. Now, there are other options, but because of the nature of this object, it is an image from an outside source, I'm limited with what I can do with it. Okay? It's a bitmap image. We don't edit bitmap images using Adobe Animate, Photoshop. But I can scale it and I can rotate it. And that's what the book is going to have you do. It's just kind of rotate it a little bit. So now we're going to make another new layer. Call this Photo 2. I'm going to go ahead and put this underscore in by default this time. That way it doesn't yell at me. Hit enter. What do you think we're going to do on this layer?
Put photo number 2.
Put photo number 2 on there. Okay. And you can place them wherever you want. You don't have to place them like I do. But do pay attention and realize that, hey, photo number 2 covers up photo number 1. Photo number 1 and 2 both cover up the background. Well, right now what we have is not very exciting. It's just nothing, right? No animation. What if we want photo number 1 to come in, say, 5 frames into the animation? Now, there's a number of ways we could do this. The easiest is to select the keyframe, that's that little black circle, and then release. Now grab it again and you can drag it down to frame number 5. Okay? Do not click and drag all one movement, because that's what's going to happen. You're going to select a whole bunch of frames. This takes some getting used to. Select and release. Take your hand off the mouse. Now I can grab that frame and I can drag it down to frame 10 if I want to. So now I'm starting to make some animation. As the playhead plays, the pictures come in. Pretty nice. Is that functioning for everybody? Okay. If not, by all means, I mean, absolutely no shame in going, no, that's not working. Because you're all new. And if it doesn't work, no, I will help it. I will help you make it work. Okay. Now on yours, we've got like this one ends right away. Let's go ahead and grab that frame for me. Okay. Now release. Now you're going to drag it back to 1. Okay, perfect. Okay. Yeah. So we just need to do a little cleanup. Okay, so I'm just going to clear keyframes. Perfect. Okay. And so we want them all to end right here. So I'm going to select all of those frames. We can right click and say remove frames. Now for this one, I want you to hit F5. F5. But that works. Okay. So this is picture number 1. That's photo number 2. Okay. Right. Let's grab photo number 1. Okay. Let's call that photo number 2. And then drag photo number 2 onto the stage. Okay. And that's basically saying you put a space in it.
Okay.
And so it's going to turn it into an underscore. They don't like
Photo
spaces.
number 2 right here.
Uh-huh. Okay. So now select just that first keyframe on photo number 1. Okay. Now click and drag that down to 5. Okay. So what happened now? If you scrub your playhead back to 1, and scrub that back. Okay. So now photo number 1 doesn't show up until 5 frames in.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go ahead and grab this one on photo number 2. And then drag that down to 10. Now that way, if we just hit enter, we'll see that. See how they pop in?
Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. You got a few extra keyframes. That just takes some getting used to. So make sure when you're bringing stuff in, make sure that you're paying attention to where your playhead is. What we want to do here now is go ahead and extend this one by hitting F and F5. So what that does, if we hit enter, it's kind of pop. Okay. We want them all to be the same one. Okay. Same thing on this one. Go to photo number 2. Select that thing. F5. And that's going to make them all the same. That way all the images don't disappear. Okay. Everybody else? Clayton, you with me? Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and let's try to do number 3 all by ourselves. We've already done it. Got a good idea. So we're just going to make a new layer. Go ahead and get in the habit of naming everything. Now I want to show you something before you get too far. Instead of dropping it in frame number 1, we can go ahead and highlight frame 15 or 20 or whatever we want. This time we're going to press F6. Last time we pressed F5 to make our timelines long. This time when I press F6, and I'll zoom way in so we can see it. When I press F6, it creates a keyframe for me. Keyframes hold our information. Now, one thing you have to know, when you create a keyframe by pressing F6, it is simply going to be a copy of the previous keyframe. In this particular case, on photo 3 layer, that keyframe was empty. But if there was content in that layer, which we're going to do here this shortly, it would make a copy of that content in the new keyframe. But since I've created a keyframe at 15, I can place my playhead, which is represented by the red part, and then all I have to do is drag and drop it, and it's going to automatically put it and keep it at frame 15 for me. Does that make sense? Okay. Lots of keyframes, lots of things like that, but we'll be approaching them over the next 3 weeks, so 3, 4, 5 weeks. So don't worry about it if some of this is like, man, I have no idea what that means. Write that down in your notes. I have no idea what that means. That way I can help you. Okay. So now we have a basic animation. Now there's 2 ways we can test this. We can very simply hit enter, and that's going to play it in the player. Return. We're on a Mac, so you hit return, not enter. But if I press command return, that is going to open up the player and let me preview it. Now this is really fast. This whole thing takes place in 1 second. Not exactly ideal. Whenever you put text on the screen, you need to leave it up there so that you, as the author, can read it from beginning to end 3 times. Because the other person who has never seen that text before is going to read it a whole lot slower than you do. You need to think about your timing. If you think things are happening too quickly, slow them down. We can slow things down very easily in Adobe Animate. I'm going to go ahead and just click on the little X to exit out of my preview. If I select a single frame and then hold Shift and select the bottom, I have now selected frames on all 4 of my layers. Now what do you think happens if I hit F5? It's going to add more frames. Notice how all of my timelines are moving at the same distance. So I'm going to slow this way down, and I'm going to do this by, again, selecting a frame on the top. In this case, I'm between 10 and 15. I'm going to select a frame on the bottom, and then I'm going to tap the F5 key, I don't know, 6, 7 times. And now I have, instead of 5 frames, I have 10 frames between each animation. I'm doing all of them evenly so that my stuff does not get out of sync. And it just makes my life easier. The book talks about this. This is kind of an important thing. We have what is called a history panel inside of Adobe Animate. The history panel can be found by going to Window and then History. The history panel functions exactly like it does in Photoshop or any other Adobe product. And what it's going to do is it has remembered the last 100 things that I've asked it to do. So if I need to, and I totally messed something up 10 moves ago, I can reset my file to an earlier point. Now, when you save the file and you close out for the day, this is erased. So it's only the last 100 things you've done. You can generally make that number higher if you want, but just know that the more frames that you have, come here, you. Let's go all the way up here, please. Thank you. The more steps that you save, the more memory you're going to want to have. But that's our history panel. The book makes it a point to mention that. Now again, I just kind of want to show a little bit of what some of these icons do as we're working up here. If I lock a particular layer again, just remember that means that I cannot select that object on that layer. If I play with the visibility, that is going to hide those objects in the viewport there. Covered all of that, covered creating a keyframe. Sorry, I realize I'm mumbling to myself, but I just want to make sure I'm not skipping over anything super important. Okay, so now the next thing we're going to look at is a way that we can add what is called a layer. What did they call them exactly? I believe something like a layer filter. Yeah, we'll go along with that. We'll call it a layer filter or a layer effect to certain things. So one thing that we might want to do as our pictures come in is we might want to take the focus off the previous picture. Now, a really super easy way to do that is to blur something out. Now, if you've used Photoshop, you should be familiar with the layer styles that they have. I believe they're called layer styles in Photoshop, such as a drop shadow or a blur effect, or there's several others. We have something very similar inside Animate. So in this case, we're going to learn how to apply that through the layers. Later on, you'll find that you can apply them lots of other ways as well. This is just one of many ways that you can do this. That's the nice thing I really like about Adobe products is there's 50 different roads to get to where you want to go. The way that works for me, you might be like, man, that's really backwards. And you might do something and I might be like, wow, that was way more steps than you needed. But hey, it got you there and that's all that matters. So we're going to learn how to blur these pictures out as they go down the timeline. So I want the first picture to blur out when picture number 2 shows up. So I'm going to have to put a keyframe in there. Now the way I do that is I select and I highlight the frame I want on the layer I want, and then I press the F6 key. Like I said before, what that does is that makes a copy of the previous keyframe. So now I have photo number 1 is technically on there twice if we think about it in a temporal kind of way. Okay? Temporal meaning time. It's the same image, it's sitting in the same spot, but we have 2 time frames so that we can mess with it. We have the first one here at frame 10 or 11 now, and then we also have frame 21. So I'm going to come over here to my properties inspector, and we are going to go all the way down here to where it says filters. Now sometimes you'll need to move panels around so you can see everything. There's also a scroll bar on the side here. But we're going to add what is called a filter. So everybody see where it says filters in your properties inspector? Make sure that you have the frame selected. And it'll say filters, and then you'll see a little plus sign. Next to that little plus sign, we have things like drop shadow, blur, glow, bevel. We're just going to blur it out. And so you can make that blur fairly strong. And so now, when it comes through, the animation is going to reach frame 21. The first image is going to blur out because of that keyframe. Now I will go around and make sure that everybody got that. Blur off.
I see this now.
Okay. So yeah, no, you're on layer 1. There should be photo number 1.
Oh, okay, that's
Okay, so come here and put your click. It's right there. So click.
yep.
Okay. Now
Go to that one.
and then blur.
Yeah. Okay.
Ooh. Oh,
Yes.
they were highlighted and you hit F6.
Yeah.
So let's go to our history panel. Go to Window, History. Go ahead and drag on the bottom. Click on the bottom and drag down. No, at the bottom right there. There you go. That way it gets bigger. And then go back until those disappear. So take that and just kind of drag it up. If not, don't sweat it for right now.
So,
Okay, so this is the marker of where you're at. I don't know how many things you've done since that happened. But what happened was you had them highlighted, you had them selected, and you pressed F6.
Yeah,
That turned them all into keyframes.
look like,
If it was me, I would delete the layer and remake it.
okay.
Does that make sense?
Yep.
Because you could try for 20 minutes to fix it,
Yeah, I tried.
but you could delete, start over,
Yeah,
be done in a heartbeat.
okay, I'll do that.
You all right? Got it blurry?
Oh, no.
And you're trying to drag it down, absolutely,
Yeah.
drag it down.
Okay.
Yeah, don't click and drag one movement, and which is your instinct to do that.
Mhm.
But unfortunately, all you're doing is selecting a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
So, that kind of bites. You, good, Animate quit unexpectedly. Not really much we can do, so we'll just say ignore it for now. I'm not sending the report.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, so did you reopen it?
Yes.
Okay, and so this is your recovered file. And so that is probably within the last 5 minutes at this saved. So we're in good shape there. What you wanna do is just do file save as, and then resave it, oh, yes, yeah, absolutely. Or you might throw a 2 on the end just to be on the safe side. Cause oftentimes I find when a file gets corrupted, even if I go back later on and name it again, the same thing, it tends to happen a lot, and I'm not sure why, but. So saving incrementally, that's something that's really super useful. You know, you don't need 50 different versions of your file. You should have 3 or 4 different versions of your file. That way, something happens, something gets corrupted, you maybe lose a couple hours worth of work, but not that much, unfortunately. So. Okay, Clayton? You all right? Okay. All right. So let's do that again now with photo number 2. So in this case, when do we want photo number 2 to disappear? When photo 3 comes in, right? So F6. I'm going to select the frame, and then I'm going to come over here and I'm going to add a filter. If you want to try something different than blur, go for it. And so now we can command enter to test that. All right. Oh, good.
So I just try to do like.
Sure.
Later so far.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's go ahead and click once, release, and then click and drag, so that doesn't show up until 15. Okay, so come back here, top layer, on layer 3, click, click that again and drag. Perfect. Okay, so as we play through now, they should pop in 1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
Let me drive for 1 second. I'm not sure where number 2 went.
Yeah, I did hit F.
It's right here. Oh, I know what happened. Click on that for me. That show us out. Yeah, show us out. Okay. So-
So now it's showing.
Correct. Okay, so come on and place your playhead right underneath there.
There we go.
And click on the frame itself. So, background layer, right
It works.
there. Does that make sense? Okay, and so now we're gonna, that's wrong, that's background, okay. Go out to frame 10. Do the same thing for photo 1 layer. So, and then bring your playhead out to frame 10. And then click on the frame itself right below the keyframe. Okay, so I want you to click right here. Nope. Yep, right there. Okay, one more time. Okay. Kind of hard to see, but what we've done is photo number 1,
Okay.
frame number 10. Press F6.
Oh, okay.
Now, come over here,
Wait.
find the filter
Wait a second.
and blur.
Is that one supposed
Okay, so that's gonna blur that image. Okay, so let's go ahead and go out to here. Okay, so frame 15, photo number 2. Okay, F6,
Just like that.
and then apply the blur. And so like I said, guys, this is one way to apply this blur thing. There's so many different ways to do it. This is one way to do it.
Things running okay, Mr. Simpson?
Yeah,
Any-
as far as I can tell, yeah, haven't had any issues. So,
Thank you.
a lot of people logged in.
Uh,
Okay, we're in the home stretch, so we're gonna muscle through this and then we'll take a break. All right, so the very last thing that the book talks about is how to create some basic shapes. Okay? And we're gonna need a new layer to hold our basic shapes. So let's make a new layer. Let's name our layer Shapes. Now to make sure that we don't accidentally draw on the wrong layer, let's lock everything except the Shapes layer. And this is a good habit to get into, locking things. We don't want our shapes to show up until after all of our pictures have came in. So let's go ahead and create a keyframe towards the end, anywhere you want. I'm at frame 47, 48. But I'm just going to press F6 again on my keyboard. Additionally, you could right click and say insert keyframe. So notice how when I click on the layers, the options are different. When I right click on the layers, the options are different than if I right click on a frame itself. Or if I right click on the stage. Or where you do stuff matters. Where the playhead is matters. We have to pay attention to all of this stuff. And it will come. It will become second nature very quickly. But we're just going to go ahead and draw some basic little shapes. Now, the different drawing tools we will be introduced to much heavier next week. But for right now, we're going to look at a special one called the Polystar tool. So in your toolbar, hover over the middle section, which is Creation Tools, until you see one that says Polystar tool. Now we're going to click on that to activate it. When we click on that, the Properties panel on the right-hand side of the screen now shows all the properties for our Polystar tool. The first two properties that we have are going to be the stroke color and the fill color. Think of this like this. If I have a ball, the ball itself is the fill. The line that goes around the outside of the ball is the stroke. So in this particular case, you can pick anything you want, but you don't want to put a white stroke on a white background because then that stroke is going to get lost. So I'm going to go ahead and go with blue, and I'm going to leave my fill as red. So I'm going to have red stars with a little blue outline on them. Secondly, we have how big is our stroke. This is something you can play with later. It's the big one. It's a big stroke. Get it? Stroke. My wife doesn't like that joke either. We have different styles of strokes. And again, we're going to get into the creation of the different objects later in more depth. The most important thing, though, is down at the bottom it says Tool Settings. You'll see where it says Options. We have a choice between drawing a polygon, which is a multi-sided object, is basically what a polygon is, or we can draw stars. So I'm going to select star. We'll say OK. Now I'm going to go to my shapes layer that I created, and I'm just going to click and drag and create a small little star. Now I'm zooming in because I want to go over something. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this off. Where this is currently sitting, this would not show in my final movie. This is in the pasteboard. But when we draw, let's go back and let's make sure that we have our Polystar tool selected. When we draw, down at the bottom of the toolbar, you will see a little circle inside of a square. That is called object drawing. Now, this is a personal preference thing. When you draw and it is off, what you are actually drawing are two separate objects. You are drawing the fill, the paint bucket side of things, and you are also drawing the stroke, which is the line that goes around the outside of our shape. It's important that you realize that these are two separate objects, because if you want to move it, you need to double click in the middle of the object, and that way you will grab both the stroke and the fill of that particular object. You can tell it's selected because it gets the little white dots all over it. Now back to the drawing star or the Polystar tool. If object drawing is on, okay, now I can tell it's on because as I click it, it gets a little grayed impression around it and it looks like it's depressed. It looks like I pressed it in. Okay, we have to pick up on these metaphors. None of these are actual buttons, but they function like buttons in the real world, don't they? You press a button, it goes click. There's no need for these to say click when you click them, but we get the idea that it's clicked. But the idea here is now when I draw this particular object, it doesn't draw it as two separate objects. It draws it as one object called a drawing object. How many use Illustrator? Okay, this is a lot like how Illustrator does things. So if that's comfortable for you, that's great. You can still come in and you can change things like your stroke width, your stroke color, and so on very easily. But it's going to put it in a container called a drawing object. Now when I learned how to use Adobe Flash, or Macromedia Flash as it was called way back when, this was the way we did things. There was no such thing as a drawing object. When they introduced them, I'm like, yeah, that's cool, I'm not using it. I like the way my program does what it does. There are advantages and disadvantages to using both. I'm going to go ahead and Command Z to go back a little bit. Now, one of the advantages to using shape drawing or merge drawing, as it's called, and that's when it's off, is if I have two shapes that cut into each other, and then I move one, it's going to cut into the bottom shape. And we'll get more into this later. The advantage to using an object drawing or a drawing object. And if you want to make a copy of something, a quick way to do that is the Alt drag, or on PC it's Option drag. I'm sorry, PC it's Alt drag, on a Mac it's Option drag. But that just makes copies. And then Command Z, of course, is undo. But if I make a copy of this, I can lay these on top of each other all day and they are not going to cut into one another. But I'm kind of getting ahead of things. I just wanted you to be aware of that. And we'll talk about that more next week. But let's say we go ahead and add some pretty little stars. Now, I'm running out of time here. I've only got 50 frames. I want to go ahead and add some more frames. So another way that I could do that, instead of going down and selecting and pressing F5, is I could just highlight the frames that I want and then click and drag. So now I have 90 frames, which is roughly 3 seconds worth of animation. And I'm going to draw my stars one at a time. So let's get back to my Polystar tool. Let's make them small. And I'm going to draw my first star. I want to go down about 10 or 15 frames. I'm going to press F6. I'm going to draw a second star. And I'm going to do that until I run out of time on my timeline. Once I've done all that, I'm going to go ahead and press Command Return to test and see my beautiful creation. At this point, since I'm pretty much done working, I want to make sure I go ahead and do a save. Now, the book does mention one more thing that I think you guys should probably be aware of. We made this at a strange format with 1280 by 720. You may need to resize things for your client. Your client might be like, that's amazing, but why is it so small, or why is it so big? Well, you can do that very easily by having nothing selected. And the easiest way to make sure you have nothing selected is to go ahead and grab your selection tool and then click somewhere in your pasteboard. That way you don't have any objects selected. And we get those properties for our document again. Now you will notice that it says size, but if I click the scale content and I change the size, so let's go 1920, it's going to scale everything up so it matches the new size. Or if I decide to go down back to 1280, it's going to scale that content back down for me. Now that works really good if you've got nice high resolution images. If you have low resolution JPEGs, do not scale them up for any reason whatsoever. Get a better copy of that file. When we're all done, we would make sure we save. And then very quickly, I want to talk about publishing for just 1 second. If you want to show this to your friends, if you make something really cool and you want to show this to them, you cannot send them just the SWF file because their machine probably will not be able to open it. The reason we can run it is because we have Adobe Animate installed. Otherwise, you're going to have to do what is called publishing. Now, there's lots of ways you can publish, but for the most part, you go to File, and then we're going to look at Publish Settings. The book doesn't talk about this yet. It talks about it later on, but I think this is important. If you want your friends to be able to view it, you need to publish the SWF and the HTML wrapper. But unfortunately, that's only going to work until 2020, and then no browser will support that anymore. But if you're on a PC, you can create what is called a Win projector. If you're on a Mac, you can create a Mac projector. These are standalone programs that take the player and your animations and anything else that you've created, and it bundles them together in, on a Mac, it would be a .exe file or an executable. I'm sorry, keep saying that wrong. On a PC, it would be an exe file. On a Mac, it would be a .app file, which is an application file. All right. They don't play nice together. EXEs don't run on Macs, and apps don't necessarily run on PC. So know your target. Know that grandma's got a Windows 95 machine or Windows XP or something. But you can make these standalones, and then you can send them to them. You can give them to them. A lot of email programs will not let you email a .exe file because a lot of spyware is exe files. So. But if you want to show off your stuff, and again, though, for now, you could send them the SWF and the HTML. I'm going to go ahead and publish this. And so you got to come down here and hit publish. And so that's going to create the files necessary. By default, it puts those files in the same folder that you were working in. So here we go. So here is the .app file on a Mac, and it's just going to run. Okay, we have not built in any controls yet. We have not made it stop. We have not given the user the ability to play it or to play it backwards or anything like that yet. We will learn to build basic interactivity, which is the cornerstone for making a game inside of Flash if you want to. Animate. So the three main file types that I want you to be aware of. Number one, the FLA file. That is your source file. You keep track of that file. If you want to edit your production, you must have your FLA file. The SWF file or SWIFT file. That's the deliverable. That's the one that unfortunately they're going to stop supporting here soon. But for now, it's a good file format for you guys. And then finally, like I said, right here, it looks a little different. This is my application that I just created. Now, I don't know how far we're going to go into this, but if I can, I'd like us to try publishing to mobile. That's something kind of brand spanking new that we can do through the Adobe Animate. It's probably easier to get it on your Android phone than it will be to get it onto my iPhone, unfortunately. But later on, we'll see, and we'll look at doing some of that towards the end of the semester. Because that's a good market. You know how many of those devices exist in the world? Billions and billions. And don't even get me started on how big a billion is. A billion is a really big number. A lot of people don't realize that. Okay. So you have this as reference. You have learned quite a bit today. This week, while you are, doing your homework, your assignment for this week is for you to take what you've learned, how to bring things in, how to put them on the timeline, simple things like that. And you're going to make your own using your own assets. So here's an example of something that would get you a pretty good grade. Now, I haven't even talked about the text tool yet, but you guys are smart. I bet you can figure out how to make text. It's very important that you put your name in your work. We'll look at text next week. But actually, I did talk about text. I used the text tool today. So, now, when you've done this, you will save it as the FLA file, and that is what you will submit before next week. I was there a year ago this month, Yellowstone. It is the most amazing place on the planet. It's absolutely incredible. It's a cool place. Watch out for them. Watch out for them bison, though. They will kill you. They will kill you. So will the antelope. Okay, so questions, comments, or concerns about what I expect you to do this week? It shouldn't really take you more than, if you're diligent, you sit here and do it in the next hour. If you want to get out of here, that's cool too. I don't mind. Listening to me talk for almost 2 solid hours that could wear you out. But make a simple little slideshow. Submit that before the due date. When you come to class next week, open up what you've made, hit Command Return, and have it playing. Before you leave, and I'm going to take a break before I do this, but before you leave, bring me and show me whatever notes you might have taken today. I realize we have a book, and that's great. You guys can go back and look at the book if you need to. And I would recommend, like, if today was a struggle, go back and do these exercises out of the book on your own. Okay? It's a very useful book. It's a good book. But before you leave today, make sure that you come and show me some notes that you wrote down. That way you can get those free points for that as well. Now, I do need to take a break. I need to walk around and need to stop talking for a few minutes. My throat hurts. I shall return.